whenever we use terms like communism for her, and I don't know if you know this, but some people call you a fascist.
Yeah, they do. So I figure it's all right to call them a communist. Yeah, they call me a lot worse than I call them.
They do indeed. It's just sometimes...
It's interesting, though. They'll call me something that's terrible, and then I'll hit them back. I believe you have to fight fire with fire. I believe they're very evil people. These are evil people.
Donald Trump was recently interviewed by soft-spoken centrist podcaster Lex Fridman, who did everything in his power to launder Donald Trump's terrible record and to help Trump distance himself from his wildly unpopular reputation. Fortunately for the rest of us, Donald Trump was too stubborn and belligerent to take the opportunity and instead reiterated multiple times that he is going to be as divisive and combative as he can possibly be. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. As a matter of fact, we probably could have made multiple videos about the entire interview between Friedman and Trump. Lex Fridman, if you haven't heard from him or heard of him, he is a wildly popular, enlightened centrist, so he tends to grade Republicans on a curve. He's a tech bro guy. He's apparently quite close with Elon Musk. Seems to be a genuinely nice guy, but his political takes genuinely suck, and they grade Republicans on a curve reflexively. Well, he interviewed Donald Trump for about an hour, and I will give Friedman credit. It was much more of a hardball interview than I expected Friedman would be capable of, but that's still by Friedman standards. Overall, it was a wild softball interview, and Donald Trump still tanked it, ignoring every opportunity, every off-ramp that Friedman, who talks about peace and tranquility and compassion, every off-ramp that Friedman gave for Trump to basically launder his terrible reputation and become more palatable to median voters, to moderate voters, to independent voters. So we're going to play several clips. It's probably going to be a longer video, and we'll unpack them together.
One of the great things about people from the business world is they're often great deal makers. And you're a great deal maker. And you've talked about the war in Ukraine and that you would be able to find a deal that both Putin and Zelensky would accept. What do you think that deal looks like?
I think the deal, and I wouldn't talk about it too much because I think I can make a deal. If I win as president-elect, I'll have a deal made.
That in and of itself is super sketch. It's led many people to speculate that perhaps Trump violated the Logan Act, of all things, that maybe he is engaged in some sort of nefarious quid pro quo with Vladimir Putin, but he's never gone into any details about what he would do to actually solve the issue. He just maintains that it never would have happened on his watch if he were president. And he talks more about this in other clips I'm about to show you, because Friedman does try to extract more information out of it. But even the framing, Friedman is grading Trump on a curve. You know, you're such a great deal maker in politics. Since when? Donald Trump failed to repeal and replace Obamacare. And this is considered that for the first 2 years of Trump's presidency, he had a Republican Senate and a Republican House and a Republican Supreme Court. He had the home turf freaking advantage. He failed to build the wall. He failed to repeal and replace Obamacare. He failed to pass infrastructure. He failed to cap insulin at $35. He failed to get us out of Afghanistan. He failed to do anything other than, get federal judges appointed and Supreme Court justices and a $2 trillion tax cut for the rich. So Donald Trump is objectively an inferior deal maker to the Biden-Harris administration, even though Lex would probably want you to believe otherwise. Another clip.
I'd like to see her do more interviews, challenged more.
I don't know. I can't believe the whole thing is happening. We had a man in there that should have never been in there. They kept him in a basement. They used COVID. They cheated, but they used COVID to cheat. They cheated without COVID too. But you had somebody in there, and now we have a woman that is not, she couldn't do an interview. This was a really soft interview. This is an interview where they're giving her multiple choice questions, multiple guests.
So Donald Trump clearly didn't see the interview, the CNN interview, the joint interview between Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz, which, by the way, is customary for the presidential candidate and their running mate to have a joint interview in the aftermath of a convention. That's been the case since 2004. Donald Trump has repeatedly done it. Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, Democrats, Republicans on either side of the aisle. I digress. It was actually a really tough interview, with the exception of the final two questions about the vice president's niece and Governor Walz's son, they were all substantive questions that were quite frankly lifted from Republican playbooks. It was all questions like, why do you flip-flop all the time, Madam Vice President? Governor Walz, why did you lie about your military record? Hey, would you like to comment on the situation in Gaza and undermine your current boss, the President of the United States? They were tough questions that accepted a Republican framing. It was not a softball interview. And by the way, I said, it was not a perfect interview by any stretch. I thought that the vice president had some shaky moments, no doubt due to them being tough questions. She knocked other questions out of the park with her answers, but it was a mixed bag all the way. But Trump can't fathom, actually being asked substantive questions and giving or attempting to give substantive answers. Another clip.
Lost by a whisker, and look what happened to the world with all of the wars and all of the problems. And look what happened with inflation, because inflation's just...
Did you catch that? Did you catch what he said? He said something that he said recently, he repeated something that he recently said when he was being interviewed by Moms for Liberty. Just going to play it one more time.
The first time you would win. You can't not win. And I got millions of more votes than that, and lost by a whisker. But
so again, for the second time, Trump admits in public that he lost. Then, of course, he tries to undercut it by saying, well, I only lost because I cheated, right? But this is the closest thing to a public concession that we will ever get from Trump on the 2020 election. And Lex Fridman is no dummy. Again, his political takes, much like Elon Musk's, are stupid, but the guy has a high IQ and he recognized what Trump said, and he actually tries to follow through on it.
Tough topic, but important. You said lost by a whisker. I'm an independent. I have a lot of friends who are independent, many of whom like your policies, like the fact that you're a deal maker, like the fact that you can end wars, but they are troubled by what happened in the 2020 election and statements about widespread fraud and this kind of stuff, fake electoral scheme. What can you say to those independent voters to help them decide who to vote for?
I think the fraud was on the other side. I think the election was a fraud. And many people felt it was that, and they wanted answers. And when you can't challenge an election, you have to be able to challenge it. Otherwise, it's going to get worse, not better. And there are lots of ways to solve this problem. Go to paper ballots, do it the easy way. I mean, the paper ballots, and you have voter ID, and you have same-day voting, and you have proof of citizenship, which is very important because we have people voting that are not citizens. They just came in, and they're loading up the payrolls. They're loading up everything. They're putting students in schools. They don't speak a word of English.
So again, just more incessant lies and non sequiturs. So a couple of things. He says, well, the fraud was on the other side. No, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans attempted to commit fraud. They attempted to defraud the American people of the results of a free and fair election that Trump lost by 7 million popular votes, which is a hell of a whisker. He says it's a whisker. That's a hell of a whisker. That's like an elephant tusk of whiskers. And he lost by the same margin in the Electoral College that he defeated Hillary Clinton in 2016. Would you say you defeated her by a whisker? No, of course not, because the standards change. And then this idea that a lot of people believe there were fraud. Well, that's because you were telling your cultists, tens of millions strong, for months prior to the election, that the election was going to be rigged. You pre-framed, you set them up to believe that the election was stolen. It was all Donald Trump's fault. Donald Trump said, yeah, I convinced people that the election was stolen, and then they believed it. And if they believe that the election is stolen, shouldn't we do something about it? No. As Ben Shapiro would say, another Lex Fridman guest, facts don't care about your feelings. It doesn't matter in terms of facts if people believe the election is stolen. If you want to have a question about what can we do to calm down the perception, we must first acknowledge the fact. Friedman, Trump, Ben Shapiro, all of them should relentlessly accept it is a fact the election was not stolen. And anyone who says otherwise is either deluded, a liar, or a moron. Then we can address perception. But Donald Trump is responsible for that perception too. And by the way, there were Democratic voters who believed that the 2016 election was stolen, the election that Trump won, because Trump was actively courting external pressure from a foreign adversary, Russia. He publicly asked Putin to intervene in the election, to hack Secretary Hillary Clinton's email servers, the DNC servers. And we know Russia attempted to interfere in the election on Trump's behalf. The difference, of course, is Democratic politicians did not attempt to steal the 2016 election from Trump. No false elector scheme, no nothing like that. Again, demonstrating the objective moral superiority of Democratic politicians over MAGA Republican politicians like Donald Trump. But think about it. By Trump's logic, if people thought that the 2016 election was stolen from Hillary Clinton, I guess that Donald Trump's 2016 election wasn't legitimate. I guess that Hillary Clinton should have tried to sue her way into the White House the same way Donald Trump tried to sue his way into the White House in 2020. Would Lex Fridman, would Ben Shapiro, would Donald Trump say, yeah, that's fair. Hillary Clinton should have tried to sue her way into the White House in 2016. We would have been perfectly okay with that. We should doubt the results of the 2016 election simply because millions of Americans did. Or would they say, no, facts are facts, and sorry, we should respect the outcome of free elections? That's what they would say about 2016. About 2020, they have a different tune, particularly Trump and Shapiro. Pretty gross and pathetic stuff. It was Trump who engaged in the fraud. And by the way, no one's saying that you can't try to audit elections or contest elections if you feel that fraud was committed, but you should abide by the lawful results. And Trump didn't. Some more clips.
So a lot of people believe that there was some shady stuff that went on with the election, whether it's media bias or big tech, but still the claim of widespread fraud is the thing that bothers people.
Well, I don't focus on the past. I focus on the future. I mean, I talk about how bad the economy is, how bad inflation is, how bad things like, which is important. Afghanistan was, in my opinion, the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to our country. And because of that, I think Putin went in. When he saw how stupid we were, Putin went in. But it was the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. I really believe that. But, you know, we left 13 dead soldiers. Think of it, 13 dead soldiers, many.
So again, it's fascinating. He says, I don't talk about the past. He does. The only reason people still have any doubts in this country about the 2020 election is because Donald Trump and his MAGA Republican high priests in the cult won't shut up about it. It's Donald Trump's fault. Number one, that it happened in the first place, that there were any doubts about it. But the fact that these doubts persist are exclusively at the fault of Donald Trump. So he's just lying there. And then, of course, when he talks about Afghanistan, Donald Trump was the one who inked the Doha deal with the Taliban. Donald Trump did that. That was the Trump administration's fault. The Special Inspector General's report did a comprehensive analysis about the collapse of Afghanistan. And they said there were multiple reasons why the withdrawal was a struggle, why the country collapsed. But the single greatest, the single most important contributing factor to Afghanistan's collapse, according to the Special Inspector General's report, was Donald Trump making a deal with the Taliban and cutting out the Afghan government. It had a trickle-down effect that could not be overcome. The delegitimization of the Afghan government, the crippling blow to morale because of Donald Trump's decision. Donald Trump pressured the Afghan government as part of his deal with the Taliban to release 5,000 of the Taliban's most vicious fighters. He armed the Taliban. He literally recruited for the Taliban. He increased the Taliban's ranks. And the Taliban took those 5,000 fighters and added them to their insurgency force, which they used to sweep the country. It was Donald Trump who did not get U.S. equipment out of Afghanistan. He wants to talk about billions of dollars left behind in Afghanistan. That was equipment sold to or loaned to the Afghan government over a span of 20 years under both Republican and Democratic administrations. Donald Trump's DOD in 2020, when he was the president, as they were executing the Doha deal, said, hey, we haven't tracked all that equipment. We don't know where most of it is. He didn't care. He didn't do anything about it. He didn't try to collect the equipment. He just left it there. He honored every damn condition that the Taliban imposed on him, and he didn't enforce any that he demanded of the Taliban. Donald Trump, the great deal maker, didn't actually enforce the terms of the deal. He gave the Taliban everything they wanted and got nothing back in return. And by the way, while it is true that 13 U.S. soldiers died on President Biden's watch during the withdrawal of Afghanistan, 45 U.S. soldiers died in Afghanistan in combat under Donald Trump's watch. So by that grim, grisly metric, if that's what we're using to evaluate presidential fitness, Donald Trump is objectively far inferior to Biden or Harris. We win, they lose. By that stupid, grim, ugly metric, if that's really how we're evaluating things, and Democrats should not be shy about pointing that out. Some more clips.
Well, let me just linger on the election a little bit more. For this election, it might be a close one. What can we do to avoid the insanity and division of the previous election, whether you win or lose?
Well, I hope it's not a close one. I mean, I don't know how people can vote for somebody that has destroyed our country, the inflation, the bad economy. But to me, in a way, the worst is what they've allowed to happen at our border, where they've allowed millions of people to come in here from places that you don't want to know about.
Donald Trump was the one who cynically killed the bipartisan, relatively conservative border bill that was authored by a conservative, Trump-endorsed Republican senator. He did it deliberately, publicly, and privately because he wanted to use it as a wedge issue in the upcoming election. The situation at the southern border, to the extent that it's a crisis at all, is now morally 100% Donald Trump's fault. Again, if you and I recognize that there's a problem, and if we both have a responsibility to solve the problem, and then at the last second, I choose to not only not help you solve the problem, I actively thwart you attempting to solve a problem that we both recognize and that we both have a responsibility to manage, it becomes entirely my fault. Same thing with Trump. And again, Democrats should be much more relentless about this. Another clip.
Let me ask you about Project 2025. So you've publicly said that you don't have any direct connection to Project
Nothing. I know nothing about it. And they know that too. Democrats know that. And I purposely haven't read it because I want to say to you, I have no idea what it's all about. It's
Right. So he's trying to engage in plausible deniability. He's so stupid. He's like, I'm cunning enough to avoid incriminating myself in this respect. I'm avoiding reading it. But dozens upon dozens upon dozens of Project 2025 authors and affiliates, people intimately involved with the program, were either former Trump campaign officials, former Trump administration officials, and people who are still close to Donald Trump, who have said, as we've discussed in previous videos, that Trump is well aware of what they're doing on his behalf, laboring on his behalf, and that he is sanctioned, he approves of what Project 2025 is all about. So yes, he owns Project 2025, no matter how far and how desperately he tries to distance himself from it. The American people aren't buying it. Another clip.
The country seems more divided than ever.
Yeah.
What can you do to help alleviate some of that division?
Well, you can get rid of these two people. They're terrible. They're terrible. You don't want to have them running this country. They're not equipped to run it. Joe, it's a disaster.
There's a lot of division in this country, Mr. President. What are you going to do as the political leader of the United States to help resolve the division? Well, the Democrats suck. We got to get rid of the Democrats. They really suck. So his answer to what are you going to do to solve division is to create more division. And you can just even see the disappointment on Lex Fridman's face, like, oh my God, I'm giving this guy every exit and he's too stupid to take it. Yeah, Lex, everyone's told you that.
I think you are at your best when you're talking about a positive vision of the future versus criticizing the other side.
Yeah. I think you have to criticize, though. I think they're nasty. They came up with a story that I looked down and I called soldiers that died in World War I suckers and losers. Okay. Now, number one, who would say that? Number two, who would say it to military people? Nobody. It was a made-up story. It was just a made-up story. And they like to repeat it over again. They know it was made up. I have 26 witnesses that nothing was said. They don't want to hear about that. Like she lied on McDonald's. She said that she worked.
He just goes on and on and on. He cannot take the off-ramp. He just can't help himself. In the course of this conversation, he refers to the vice president as stupid and Democrats as evil. He is just inherently divisive because he's too arrogant and stupid to be anything else. One last clip.
This person in the world. But on the previous thing, in the spirit of unity, you used to be a Democrat.
Yeah.
Setting the politicians aside, what do you respect most about people who lean left, who are Democrats themselves or of that persuasion, progressives, liberals, and so on?
Well, look, I respect the fact that everybody's in there. And, to a certain extent, life is what you do while you're waiting to die. So you might as well do a good job. I think in terms of what's happening now, I think, we have a chance to save the country. This country's going down. And I called it with Venezuela. I called it with a lot of different.
Again, he cannot take the exit. Lex Fridman is offering it up. I mean, he's shining a spotlight on it. He's like, here, take it. Take it for the love of God. Just take it. And Trump won't do it because he's that metastasized with hatred and rage and fragility. That's malignant narcissism on full display. You should watch the full thing. It is fascinating in terms of, again, Donald Trump just being too stupid to take a layup for what it is. Again, he repeatedly insults the Democratic Party, Vice President Harris, President Biden, people on the left in general. And again, this is the closest thing to a hardball interview we've ever seen of Lex Fridman, who seems like a genuinely nice guy, but he's just not up to actually holding power to account, which is fine. But don't pretend that that's what you're about and that you're about having challenging conversations. Pretty sad stuff. And again, Donald Trump is not a good deal maker. He's an idiot with a terrible record, objectively inferior by far to the Biden-Harris record. There's no contest. And he can't answer questions, substantive questions with substantive answers. Pretty obvious. So check the full thing out. It's wildly entertaining for what it is. And in the meantime, you let me know what you think in the comments.